Glad to see you again in webinar number 2. So some time passed and we want to keep you updated with some of the new features RPC Connect, the software, brings along. Let's hop right into it. Today we want to talk about 2 specific stages from RPC Connect. So as you remember from our last webinar, the RPC applications are called stages now. We want to focus on some differences between RPC Pro and RPC Connect and introduce some new functionalities to you. So many of the changes which were proposed by our customers, so you, we want to thank you and say thanks that you helped us to improve the software in a way that it fulfills yours and our needs. So thanks again. As we all know, in general, we need to pass all stages to be able to run our durability test. So as you can see here, the different stages are listed up, and the test is somehow the portion or the stage which completes the puzzle, and the other stages are enablers. And today we want to focus on setup and analyze, as I said. So what do we expect here? I think we need to refresh our minds first to see what these stages are contributing to. So here's a brief overview of what setup and analyze are used for. So setup is mainly focusing on being the interface between the rig and our FlexDisk controller and decides what data will be sent and collected. Furthermore, it helps to protect our specimen and do further calculations on the signals recorded. So as you all know, the event actions and so on. Analyze is all about the data preparation and organization. So the files we record, mainly on the road or somewhere else, have to be inspected carefully. Of course, otherwise we can cause some damage to our rigs or our specimens, and we do not want that. So, however, I created an overview to graphically show you what setup and analyze are focusing on. So as you can see here on the left side, RPC is somehow the interface between the user and our controller. So RPC sends a command, so our drive, to the controller sends it to our here in this case 329 road simulator, or what rig you have in your lab, and then the actuators move and the sensors, transducers, give us a feedback which we collect as the so-called system response. This system response has to be analyzed by the user and then decided if the iteration goes well or not. So as we can see, analyze, or let's say setup, has a lot of important functions we need to take care of before we measure our FRF. So let's start with the setup stage. So any questions so far for the slides we have seen so far, or let's make a short break maybe here?
No questions yet, Safa.
Okay, then I will continue. So yeah, let's start with the setup stage and explore some new functionalities. As you know from our last webinar, I tend to hop into the software, show you some functionalities, and then come back to the slides again. This is what we will do in the next few minutes then. So this is the basic layout structure of the RPC Connect setup. So it can be divided into three parts. So the first part, which is giving you information about the connection status. So as you can see here, the controller, in this case, the setup is connected, the 329 two-corner system. With that little button, you can create a new setup. This button enables something like a setup save as function. The next button shows you like the setup is currently connected. Here with that button, of course, you can disconnect it. And then it shows which the 793 surface, the station you're currently running, is connected to. And then, of course, the parameter set, which is in the 793 station, loaded. So part 2 is all about the well-known settings we need for our FRF analysis. So as we still do our calculations with the help of the frames, we did only a slight change here. The frame size itself will be shown in seconds. So in order, if you cut your signals or something like that, you will directly know, okay, why is RPC filling the frames with, for example, in this case, the frames will be filled with 5 seconds later on. So this is only a slight change we did here. So the last part of section 3 is one of the things we are going to concentrate on today. So drive and response, you should be all very clear to you, of course. In drive, you choose the, let's say the channels which move the rig, and in response, you gather or collect your feedback data. The event act helps to stop the test in a defined way to prevent our rigs and our specimens from severe damage. And we made some changes here. So let's have a look how it was in RPC Pro and what was a burden. So let's go into RPC Connect and into RPC Pro. And we just create a setup, a new setup. Let's call it Webinar Digital I/O Session. So I select the controller. I have loaded a demo station here on the 793 surface. It's a 329 two corners rig, just for an example here. I loaded this station and now I will connect to it. So once the setup is connected, as you can see here, we have this little tab called Event Actions. And what most of our customers do is they hop into that and say, okay, for the run section, for example, if I have, let's say we want to iterate a brake event, we are going to use these event actions to clamp the brakes and unclamp the brakes. And so, of course, for the run sections, we are going to set, for example, here's the digital inputs output as the digital outputs. For example, here the brakes, I want to have it on run while the test is running. And when it's on abort, so I'm going to switch to abort, the test should release the brakes. So what we are going to do is to set the brakes on low. I hope you are all familiar with that functionality in RPC Pro. So what happens now if I save that setup and say, okay, I'm going to disconnect from the station. So now I'm going to clamp the brakes manually because I need to do some investigations on my rig, or I want to trigger them manually. So what I do is I go into the station manager, go into the digital output section and say here, brakes on. I say, okay, it should start or stop, or I just directly hit it to, let's say, enable it, whatever I define here. I make a change in the digital outputs. And this causes a lot of troubles into RPC Pro. So let's reconnect the setup which we just created. So it was the webinar. Let me check. So webinar digital I/O. We just connect this setup again and see what happens during connecting. So now, as you can see, RPC is complaining about a lot of digital I/O settings. It's saying that you should recheck all your settings, and what you need to do as an RPC Pro user, you need to go back into your event actions and recheck all the configurations made. So today we just had a run and abort section for the event check section. So we need to recheck them and say digital outputs all on low, all on high again, and just prove our data to make it possible to run this setup again. So a lot of work which need to be done before we start working with the setup again. So let's have a look how we change this behavior into RPC Connect. So let's start RPC Connect. Start the English version and say, okay, we are going for a new project called webinar, and then the date of today, for example. And so as you can see here, this is the setup which I showed you. So I just showed you here are the tabs which we were seeing on the slides. So we are going to create a new setup. We call it Webinar Digital I/O. Well, let's go back to the first, to the same settings as we had when we connected first time in Pro. So I'm going to release the brakes that RPC has control over it again. So we have the initial state which we had for RPC Pro as well. So now I'm Webinar Digital I/O is the setup, I call it, and then I go to connect it with a 793 station as I did in RPC Pro as well. So let's see what happens. We do exactly the same steps and then see the behavior of the new RPC Connect. So we hop into the Event Action tab. And then as you can see, here's the abort section. In the abort section, we had setting digital inputs outputs to low. So now I put that available selection here on the right, and then I can define the changes here as well. So it's similar behavior. I want to have the brakes on low while it's on abort. And if I hop into run, I want to have it on brakes on high, of course. So I save the setup, say okay. And just to mention for you guys, in RPC Pro, it was like once using special available actions here, for example, the digital inputs, outputs, you were not able to use them twice. So now you can put them as many times as you want to have it in, and not able to create any groups or something like that. That is not necessary anymore. So the events which are available and should be used twice, like a time delay, for example, you can use them several times. However, let's go back to our digital input output stage. So I connected the setup, now I disconnect it again. Let's do the same change we did with the RPC Pro session some minutes ago. So we go back to the 793 surface and say, okay, the brakes are controlled by myself. I want to take the control of this output. And let's see what RPC Connect is doing now. So I'm going to reconnect with this button here, the same setup we did. And what happens now is, let's go to we have implemented a kind of tab here called Initial Digital Inputs Outputs. And this section here will control what kind of digital output was changed or not. So in this case, you see that the brakes do not exist anymore. So this is a kind of error message, which tells you the brakes, there's some change or the RPC has no control over it. So what you can just easily do is say, okay, I'm just going to remove the brakes. Say, okay, remove, it will accomplish and tell you that all the actions connected to the brake will be removed. So only the digital output for the brakes will be removed in all your available actions. And then that's it. I can directly work with the setup, reconnect, and run the station. So it's checking each of the outputs, which was not possible in RPC Pro. So I think this is really, really a big advantage. So people or guys who work a lot of with calculations or change a lot of times the digital inputs, outputs, that's a big advantage. And it was really, really disturbing in RPC Pro. So glad that the team solved this problem. Okay, so RPC Connect will show what changes are made during connecting with the station. So this is a big highlight of showing you in this webinar. The next thing I wanted to show you is the setup response analysis process. So what is this tab for? The setup response analysis helps you to run a user-defined process while using this specific setup. So you connect the setup with a special analysis process you define on yourself. So it might be really helpful, for example, if you have two different setups, like one iteration setup or one durability setup, for instance, and they should perform different actions while using them. And this functionality enables a lot of flexibility using different setups with different functions connected to them. Furthermore, this functionality replaces the computed or calculated channels from RPC Pro, which you are familiar with. So this time you have to go into the channel transformation tool, for example, do your calculations, and then put them in as a process. So the typical computed or calculated channels you know from RPC Pro are replaced by this function. So the next tab here is the image tab. So the image tab is simply for personalizing your setup. You might ask for the benefit, right? So it's an easier way to recognize it. So just ask yourself, when did you run the rig with the wrong setup activated? So I think everybody always, it happened to everybody of us, and now it's an easier way of remembering our setup. And we predefined some of the standard rigs we have, like a 329 or a mast. And directly, if you select your setup, this little picture will switch and you will directly see, oh, this is the right setup I'm using on a mast, or I'm using a 329 right now, or whatever specifies your needs. So you can even put a private photograph on that one to recognize your setup. Okay, here's a big change which helps a lot of RPC Pro users to create the setup much faster. So in RPC Pro, you had the only scroll down list. You can remember if you have like 400 channels, which I had, for example, in my 329, you can see that's a really, really burden to find your channels. So let's go back again in RPC Pro and then connect our setup we created a second ago and see how it was sorted out. So you Okay, I don't take care about the event act node here because I know I did some changes on my event act. But let's see what happens with the signals. So most of the time, it's pretty easy on the drive side. So if you have a 2-corner system or let's say 4-corner, you have more or less the maximum numbers of drives you can get. So 22 signals is, let's say, okay to choose, but let's go on the 410 side. So let's say I want to have the left longitudinal LVT here, and here I want to have the right longitudinal. So I needed to click on that and then search for it, right, and then go here. And let's say each time I start a new, I need to scroll down this whole list, so like 400 channels. So it's a really, really time-consuming stuff to do that in RPC Pro setup. And in RPC Connect now, we changed this behavior a lot, and there's a lot of improvement. As I showed in my last webinar, so we are going back to RPC Connect now. As I showed in my last webinar, we have this filter function. So for example, if I want to have, let's say, some dimension filtered, I can type in like, I only want to have length, and then it will show only length. And this little symbol shows you that a filter is activated, and I can clear the filter again to see all of them. Or I can use like something like a star in front of it and say vertical, for example, or let's say lateral. Let's make an example here. So what I can do is I can filter out any channel I want with the expressions you see here. So they are documented now, and you can say search for something and make it a really complex search to find your files. Or you can use simply the drag and drop, which we have here, grab these little dots and then bring them to the right. And now you have selected the first 12 channels, for example. On the response side, now we have, again, these 400 channels. And what we can do is, of course, as I showed you, filter and try to figure out if I find like something like Vorcell. So it's a German word for KMD is Vorcell, Kraftmessdose. And this one you can filter out. But this might be, let's say, okay to have, nice to have. But what we invented is we have some kind of populate response channels, for example. So if you remember you had any file in RPC Connect using before, and it might be similar to the setup you want to create, you just simply go into, let's say, Analyze. Let's save this setup, and then import your files. So I switch to Analyze, and then select, let's say, an old time history I remember I want to use. Let's say these two files are the files I want to use to create my setup. You import them, switch back to setup, and say save. We will import or put an import function here as well, which is currently not working. As you know, the software is still in its beta stage. But what you can do now is, if I go into the response side and say populate response channels, and say depending on a time history, I go to browse. Browse means I'm searching for the stages. Now I go into Analyze, where I imported my data, and say, for example, this is the EDT I had last time. I'm assuming that that one will fit to my response channels. And now RPC Connect is going through the left side of the list, searching everything it finds and brings to your list. So now you see I have 48 channels of response side created within a second. So for those guys who use a lot of time switching their setup, they will be having an easy time to create new setups with the help of old files they have already created. So as you can see here, I show you, this is the file I imported. So it's the EDT I selected. We have 48 channels, and it found always 48 channels here as well. So this is a nice way of creating just new setups and being really, really smart here. Okay, before we hop into Analyze, any questions to setup? These are some slight functionalities I wanted to show you and see. I hope you got a good overview of setup, that we improved it, and these little changes make it really, really easy to work with setup now.
So there's a general question about the availability of RPC Pro and RPC Connect. Sounds like a Josh question. Do you want to answer that now, Josh, or defer that one?
Yeah, I can answer that real quick. So the question was, will RPC Pro and RPC Connect both be offered by MTS going forward? And the answer there is yes, RPC Pro will continue to be available for the time being, along with RPC Connect. The only caveat there being that The next launch of RPC Pro, which is coming in the next couple of months, will be the last release of RPC Pro with new functionality. And RPC Connect will be where MTS is putting all of its investments in the future.
Anything else?
No other questions in the chat at this point, Safa. So let's continue.
Okay. So what about analyze? So the software is now unit and dimension aware. That means that you can select standards for recalculation of your units. So for example, if you mix Newton and kilonewton, RPC will directly take care of that and combine it, divide it by 1,000, multiply it by 1,000, and directly use it, that you don't combine channels or units which are not compatible. This reduces the complexity of the channels you use for calculation, and the only thing that it might bring a kind of negative aspect is, for example, if you import some files. Let's go into the software and say we go into analyze now. And then we import any file from RPC Pro. So I have prepared a file which is from RPC Pro, and you click on open. In RPC Pro, it was pretty easy to make some, let's say, change the units while just changing the string. String means just using header modification, for example. And for instance, you see here that RPC now is searching, RPC Connect is searching for a known unit, and he's not knowing what is kilonewton. Maybe some operator did a mistyping here, and I need to reselect and tell RPC what it is. So in this case, I know kilonewton is a mistype, and I say, okay, it is a force. And I can use the filter function, of course, I can use the filter function, say force. And it's, of course, kilonewton refers to kilonewton. If I know that I always make the same mistake, or I have like Newton meters always with a X in between and not with a point or something, you can tell RPC that it applies, and it is always like, do that all the time while using import function and finding files with this similarity. So for example, G is always in not in a capital letter, so it's of course an acceleration, and I need to make sure that RPC knows that the little g is the big G in my RPC Pro file. So once you hit apply, now RPC is taking care of your units. And you find the units here on the projects, settings, and then on the unit set manager. So once you go here, this is the files or the data he uses to recalculate. So everything you want to change, you're just hopping in here into RPC Connect, and this is all the stuff which RPC uses for calculation. So make sure this file is definitely set up correctly in order to get right values while using RPC Connect. Another thing which this one brings along is that the unit awareness is, for example, let's say we go for the time history, let's say calculus, for instance. We have, I hope, some math users online. This is a benefit for math users. So let's grab any time history we have here. If it makes sense or not, let's put it aside. But now you have the possibility to calculate with this little button, displacement, velocity, and accelerations for each channel. So once I hit this button, RPC will add to all length channels or velocity acceleration. So I get now in this time, I get the damper left, for example, the length is here shown, therefore the damper, the velocity is shown, and the acceleration is shown. This little feature which you see here, by the way, is the eliding feature we implemented. So once you select your files and scroll and make little columns, it will elide and show you ... and you can read it more or less. So once you go into these settings, just to show you what the application can do. And let's say we have an example here, a long file is called like this. You can tell the software what you want to read. So if you are the guy who is using, let's say, all the time the end stuff of the file naming, you can select that this one will be shown up. So just have a look here down below. You will see if I say this is marked, this will be always elided. So if I'm not interested in the end of the files, I just elide that one out and see more of the left part of the signal itself. So it's a good function to be a little bit individual and searching and reading your files. That's just by the way. Okay, what I wanted to tell you guys is here, the length, velocity, and acceleration is just with a single click created. So no need of using any mathematical functions like time history, math, or filtering all the time to get all these functionalities here. And this is due to the unit dimension awareness of the software. And you can directly tell if you want to have it in kilometers, for example, it will show up in kilometers. And yeah, you can do that in every tool. So for example, if you go into a header modification, and let's grab our time history, which we used for an example here. Let's grab this time history and say, I don't want to have the left longitudinal in millimeters. I want to have it in kilometers. I just select the unit, say run and close. So I will get a file, of course, called mod again, as you know from RPC Pro. And now if I can compare these two files, one is in kilometer, one is in meters. So let's hop in. This is in millimeters, and that one is in kilometers. So as you see, RPC directly recalculated the units here. Okay, that's so far for the unit dimension awareness. Let's go further. So let's talk about a little bit about, by the way, the time history calculus replaces the time history motion conversion tool, which you were familiar with. Maybe some of you guys recognized it. But anyway, let's go for some other functionalities here as well. Let's see what the further changes we made. So the software brings along the possibility to use several files in a single tool. So it's not a batch processor you're expecting here. It's more an example of selecting several files. So in RPC Pro, you had one time history, and then you did a channel extract, got another time history. Then you took the second time history, did a channel extract, and did a third time history or second time history. After that, you used the tool merge and append and got your final time history. So you are always using like single tools to create one final time history file. In RPC Connect now, you can type in many or search for many time histories and put them in one channel extract and then use it to get your final file. Let's go for an example here. Let's import some files here. Let's say these two files we want to do for the channel extract. So I'm going to hop with the quick launch tool, as you know from the first webinar. I'm going to hop on and say channel extract. And what RPC software is doing now is it's giving an alias to the files I'm selecting. So what is the alias? Let's search for our first file. So channel time history 1, channel extract gets the alias 1. So what I see here, if I uncollapse and collapse it, this is my first time history, which I use. So all the files I select to the right will get the alias 1. So it's related. And if I click on this little plus button here, I can search for another time history. Let's say in my case, time history number 2 consists of 36 channels, for example. So now I get a second tab here, seeing that there's a second file. And what I can do now is, let's remove all of the files here. I want to have, let's say, the first 12 channels from time history 1. And then I'm going to show you that I need, let's say, the next 12 channels from time history number 2. So it shows you the aliases A and B, so that you know which time history was the files or the channels selected from. Now, if I hit run and close, I get a ext file. So it's the channel extract file ext. And this one contains all the channels I combined right now. So let's remove the other ones we just compared. Go to the preferences here, and now you see the first 12 channels from the one file and the other channels here. In this case, it's a wheel force transducer, are combined, and I get a single time history within using one tool. Okay. Another thing in RPC Pro, you need to be, let's say, an experienced user to use or to find some functionalities, like, for instance, the clipping factor or some other files. Some other options you needed to know to be able to work in an efficient way. So in RPC Connect, we tried to improve this a little bit, and we changed some of these functionalities. As you all might know, that the channel transformation tool was kind of linked to setup. So if you wanted to create any file connecting to your current setup, getting the sample rate and everything prepared relating on your setup, you use the channel transformation tool. So in RPC Connect, we changed this a little bit. We sorted that a little bit out. So let's go into RPC Connect again. And if you want to create a file concerning or connected to your setup, you can go to any tool. Let's go into the cut tool. And everywhere where you find this little plus button and it says create new seed file from setup, you can just click on plus. And let's select the setup I had created a second before, so webinar, and say we want to have it connected to the response side. Now you are able to create your so-called seed file with a certain time length you want to have. So let's say it's like 20 seconds. And you can even say, okay, you want to have your channels to be all set on, let's say 2. So what happens now? If I click on OK and minimize all the windows, I will see a digital I/O. So this is called webinar digital I/O because I connected it to my setup, and then seed for the name. You can change the name at whatever you want, but let's see what happens here. So if I go into that file and have a look here, you see the channels I have are all related to the setup. So it's all the response side we sorted out. So this was the populate channel functions I used in the setup in the beginning of the webinar. So it shows my 48 channels. These 48 channels will have a value and a certain time length. So with that help, everywhere where you find this little plus sign and it says create seed file, you can get your own file connected to your setup. So it's visible for all our customers and not only the experienced ones, which knew that this was in a channel transform tool. And these things, something like that, we sorted out in RPC Connect. So like clipping factor will be showing up in the wizard and so on. All these nice functionalities are now on the page that you can directly use them. Okay, so here's another example to see how to create a seed file. So even if you use the scroll down button here, you get a plus and create a new seed file. So everywhere in the tools, it's available and can be created right away. Another thing which we changed is the time history statistics. So the time history statistics are really, really important for us. So our customers used it quite a lot and used the statistics tool to get the statistics in Excel or wherever. So now in RPC Pro, you need to run these tools to get something like that. And in RPC Connect, we changed this behavior a little bit. We went into, so we have the statistics tool available. So if you search for statistics, it's still available. But, but what you can do is with a right click on the file and say properties, you directly get the statistics for these files here. So you directly see all the statistics, min, max, and everything you might be interested. And we implemented a new feature. So if you, for instance, say right-click, select all, you can now copy the values here, or say right-click, copy with headers, and then copy it into Excel, for example. So if you hop into Excel, you can just copy and paste it with all the columns and the names you're searching for. So as you can see here, it pops up, and guys, I tell you, this time it's working nice. So copy and paste from Excel and so on is working really, really nicely. So you can copy it with the channel, with the headers, or without the headers. These two options you have here. Okay. Okay, the next thing, or the next beneficial options I want to show you are the plotter functionalities. So we have improved the plotters a little bit. We put some time into that and thought, okay, everybody loves our plotters. What can we change here? There might be some slight functionalities which might be beneficial. So let's go into this plotter, for example, and say, I want to create any file and cut something like that. So as I showed you in my last webinar, you can set the plotters or set some functionalities to set your files to a plotter. So I can call it a custom plotter, for example, and say, okay, webinar plotter is the one I want to give it a name. Say, okay, RPC Connect will send it now to the plotter, and I can, for example, tab it as I showed in my last webinar talking about document manager model. Now I've tapped it here, and I can use it for investigation. So now I have a custom plotter called webinar plotter. With a right click on other files, I can send the files to the custom plotter, to my webinar plotter, to a new plotter, or create as many plotters as I need. So this plotter always stays open and I can use it for later evaluations. So if I work with, let's say, several files and I send them to the plotter again, let's say I send it to another plotter and, oh, sorry, it was the same file. Let's take another file. send it to the plotter webinar. So now I have two files and I selected something to compare and even zoomed. I can use another plotter to work directly on the next file, which I'm interested in. So send it to plotter 1, for example, and it goes here. So having that, it's quite interesting that I can, for example, say, okay, most of the time I have a lot of files, a lot of channels I want to compare, and then the legend was always a problem. Let's do an exaggerated example here. So if I have selected a lot of files to compare, for example, here, you won't see any signals anymore. So you tended up to go into the options, change, do not show the legend, and then I could see my files. So what I do here is I just select it here as a new button, show legend, and then I will see all my files and see, okay, what was the red signal here? For example, I see show legend, and now I see it's the left lateral, and I can continue with my investigation. I can resort the files. So if I, let's say, accidentally sorted them wrongly and cannot see, so this happened a lot of times when I have my desired and my drives I want to compare, I can just grab the file and sort it out, and RPC will then resort it while keeping the selected stuff here. So this is quite interesting, and as I heard, some of the functionality might come into RPC 5.5, of course, as well, but this is first planned, let's say, for RPC Connect, which is pretty new here. Okay, another thing which we have here is what was a burden in RPC Pro is we had no enable editor mode. So each time you selected your files and sent them to the plotter, you only had these functionalities here. Then you needed to close the file and send it back to the editor mode now. So in this case, in RPC Connect, we have now the enable editor function. You just select it, you get all the editor functions, you mark your regions, you cut your tools, whatever you need to do, and then you can disable it again and work right away in the same plotter you use. Okay, these are some functionalities I wanted to show you within the plotters. By the way, I forgot to show you that we have a zoom functionality here now. So if you zoom here with a mouse now directly on one file, let's say I'm going to see something clearer here on 8 seconds, for instance, I go with the mouse just on the 8 seconds and use the scroll bar, and it will zoom directly in that area which I'm interested in. Okay. Another stuff which we changed in the analyze mode is the recording of tool selection. So most of our customers are using the, let's say, same steps to finalize their data for their durability run. So you get from another lab, you get a recorded time history and you need to prepare it. And yeah, we have the option here to record the files and the tools you are using with the settings. So if we hop into the software again and say, for example, we have like a file to import, let's say data here, we take that one and we want to prepare it to send it out to the controller or have it as a final desired. We just hit this button here and RPC starts now to record the tools you are using. So for instance, what are we going to do? We are going to do a resample, for example. So this is the first step. So our sample rate now is on 409.6 and we want to have it reduced on 204.8. Let me select the right one. So we want to have it on 204.8. Let's do not take care a lot of what I'm setting here. It's just an example. So I just resample my file. And then I'm going to, let's say the next step would be to filter it because it is, for instance, a break signal. And the break signal, let's put the tapering off. And let's say the break signal will be only from 0 to 35. Is the way I want to iterate my break signal. I say run and close. And then finally, I need to, let's say, channel extract some files. So don't take care of any of the settings I'm just using here. So I just want to show you how to use the recording tool section here. So now I get my final files here, and then I remove that list and say, I just want to have the first 8 channels for whatever reason. Say run and close. And once this is finished, and you know, for example, lab A, let's call it lab A. Lab A will always give you the files in the same order with the same naming, and every steps I need to do are always the same. I just recorded the tools I was using, and if I hit stop now, I call it lab A data preparation and say, okay, click OK. What happens now is RPC Connect will create a process which will go through that steps I did. So I used the resample tool. It's using, let's maximize that window to get full view here. So it's using my sample rate settings I did here, so 204.8. It used the filter I set to 35. It did the channel extract and directly created a so-called process out of it to use it right away next time the lab A sends me any file. So, okay, with that, I want to just show you that, or say that we have invented a lot of new stuff into RPC Connect, as you can see. So we did a lot of improvement in that software and invented some new tools. Some of them are mentioned here, and we will discuss some of them in the next webinars. And I hope you did see a good intro into the new RPC, into setup and analyze stage. And then with that, I want to thank you and hope to see you again in the next webinar. And yeah, time for questions now, and stay all healthy. Thanks.
Thanks, Safa. Several questions queued up here. Josh, do you want me to just march into these?
Yeah.
Okay. On the setup response analysis, will channel transformation tool be available to add channels like calculated channels used in Pro rather than having to create all the response channels and adding them at the bottom?
So the channel transformation tool, as you see it here, let's go to channel transform. It will be exactly available in the setup process. So what you can do is, let's go for an example. What you can do is you can, let's say, we are going to hop into, let's say, model, because model is having these options already ready. So all the options will be ready, but analyze it's still on the beta stage. But let's do it here. So we create a process and say setup RSP process. Say okay, and then now just hop in the channel transform and then give us some space to work with that tool. Now you can select any time history. Let's go and browse for the time history I used last time in Analyze. Just for instance, here, let's use that one and say select. So now I can use all the expressions I have here. So let's put an example here, say left longitudinal. I need to always, let's say, add 2 kilonewtons, or this is the LVT 2 millimeters, whatever. I need to do that and say +2. And then for whatever reason, I want to multiply it with, let's say, the vertical, whatever it is. Let's do an example here. So all these functionalities which are set here in the channel transform, I can close it. So you do your calculations here, your computed channels, and then you go back into setup and say, okay, for this specific setup, like webinar digital outputs, I can select this process. So it's called setup response process. And now these channels will be available after, for example, here in the model stage, after you run specific tools in the, after you run some specific tools here in RPC Connect. Let me check. So if you go here, for example, in the setup, and it says you have some of the generation process drives here, for example, these processes which we created right now will be available into RPC Connect once the setup is running. So for example, after the responses are calculated, the response will now run this tool which we created, the setup response analysis process. So then the files or the channels we created will be available. Hope this answers this question. Anything else?
Okay, the next two questions are about time history calculus. On time history calculus, can the velocity or accelerations be in different units, i.e. from millimeters in displacement to G's in acceleration?
Yeah, so what you can do is if you go here into time history, let's select the file I have. Let's say any file I have here. Let's select that one. So I'm not sure what is in the file, but let's see. So we have like length and angle. So if I click on the time history calculus and include, as I understood your question, right, length, velocity, and so on, I am able now to choose whatever, let's say unit I want to have, like centimeters here for the velocity, here for the lateral, I want to have like meters per hours. And for the vertical acceleration, I want to have it in, let's see, feet squares. So this can be available. This is no problem. You just hit run and close, and it will create the units you set here directly. Okay, anything else?
Also, regarding time history calculus, can you add the velocity channels rather than converting them?
So time history calculus, the question here is to add any channels. That was the question, or?
Add velocity channels rather than converting them.
Oh, okay, got it. So if I, let's say, just remove that channel here and say I want to just add the velocity channel, I can, of course, click on add and then tell the software what channels should be added, right? Yeah. So then I can select like velocity and, okay, now it's a duplicate, but yeah, of course, you can add only velocity channels. You can add only acceleration channels. Yeah. Okay, anything else?
A few more questions. Regarding channel extract or other tools, can you use batch processor current files? It was a string for input files. Does that make sense? Okay.
So if you have like the channel extract, this functionality stays, of course. So you have still like batch processor current files. So we have still the same placeholders as you had in RPC Pro, but we call them now, these are, I think most of our customers are familiar with these wildcards. We now have variables selected. So you can have a placeholder as a variable for specific files. In this case, it's called batch processor current file, so batch current file. Or, I mean, many people know that in RPC Pro from the last time history, you just use the hash. And this time we have it called like use last time history, of course. And you can use these still as you were, let's say familiar with RPC Pro. But they're called now variables or placeholders. Anything else?
A couple more. Is there an easier way to set up analog channels in Station Manager, or will we still need to set up channels one by one?
So the question is, I think, more or less concerning building the station, right? So if this is the question aiming at, it is about the station builder stays the station builder. So RPC Connect is not really touching the station manager at all. So meaning the functionalities in station manager to get your station will stay the same. So there's no change because it's, let's say, another department. It's like 793 software development. And this is only, inverted commas, only RPC Connect. So as far as I know, there will be no change to that.
Okay. Is wildcard input available in RPC Connect?
So no, we don't have any wildcards anymore, as I said. So we have the variables editor. So it's called input variables. You just click the plus sign here. And then you have all the predefined variables which are there, like stage route drives, for example. So you use the last drive. We have for everything, it's like you hover with the mouse over it and you know what it is, or you just go slightly to the help. And if you want to have your wildcard as you were in RPC Pro, like the user 1 or whatever you used, you have not only user 1 till user 8 or user 6, what we have. You can just say, okay, create a variable and say, we call it the user 1. Oh, sorry, call it the user 1 and say my display name is user 1. You give it whatever reason you want to use it, whatever the way you want to use it, depending on you. You can call it just a string to have it as a placeholder, like a time history file name, for example, and you type in something you're interested in, or you can say it's a double along a Boolean value, and then you hit OK. And once this is done, you have this variable, let's say, everywhere available. So if you go into any tools, like let's say we go into the cut tool, and then as I told you last time in my webinar 1, you can toggle these buttons. So what you can do is toggle here. This is the symbol for variables. And then you scroll down and you see this list, and then you find your file, which I created, and I forgot the name. I'm sorry about that, but here they will pop up and then you can use it right away. So these are the replacements for the wildcards. It offers a lot of flexibility, and we have now the possibility to, let's say, use the Python interface, for example, and all these functionalities changed from RPC Pro now have a lot of advantages. But of course, we need to learn to work with variables. And those of you guys who work with our other software packages like Test Suite or something like that, they are familiar with like variables. So all the layouts and all the techniques to work with our softwares will become similar. And this was not the case before. Anything else?
Another question. If you want the response channels from an existing file for your response setup, how will the mapping be done if the names of the selected file do not match the response channels of your configuration?
That's a good question. So I need to check this one out, but as I know is if you go into, let's say, simulate, so RPC Connect is now name-based. It's really taking care of the names right now. So if you go in and set your target, you have the possibility to say, okay, if they don't match, let's say I've created my setup with the 48 channels I have, and I know that they are different. You're just going here, and let's make an example. Let's say sine wave. Now I'm just going on to show you guys like 10, and right click here and say copy to all amplitude cells. Replaces somehow the fill down because the fill down is still available. But if you want to have it from the first line to the last line, you can just say right click, copy to all amplitude cells. That's a new feature. That's, by the way, oh, I'm sorry. I need to get rid of the tapering and say, okay, we put it on the response side here. Sorry, put 10 here and say copy to all amplitude cells. Now I just created an easy example of a file which I want to use for my target file. So let's put the TGT in the end here. Let's say TGT for target now, and I can select it here. And so what we have now here in RPC Connect is that you have the function of showing that my simulate channel names, so the ones from the setup are different from the target channel names. So whatever I type in here, I can select the channels from my setup, and let's do something odd, but let's do it. I can tell RPC that the MX here corresponds to the left longitudinal. Of course, now I have a double selection, and I need to reselect that one and say it's something else, whatever reason, but let's say we do something stupid like that. RPC will say, okay, MX is now the left longitudinal. So it's now name-based and it's taking care of your order. So what you can do is you can just, your order in your FRF or your order in your EDT can be changed, and RPC is taking care that these two channels always correspond now. So this is what you can do. But I think the question was a little bit more or less aiming on that if I am in setup, and then do the populate channel stuff, which I showed you in the webinar, what will happen to the files? Is he finding any files, right? That is the question. And I think I need to ask the team what happened there. I did not check it out so far. So thanks for the good question. And I will come back to you guys and give you an answer to that. Hey, anything else?
One final question, more for Josh, on the availability of RPC Connect timing.
Sure. Like we mentioned at the beginning, RPC Connect is still on track for an early 2021 launch timeframe. So we'll continue to do these webinars as we get closer to the actual launch of the product. So be aware for that. You know, we'll continue going through the different stages of RPC Connect, but and I will continue to update you as we get closer, but we are still on track for early calendar year 2021.
Thanks, Josh. And that's the end of the questions. And I think we're ready to conclude.
Okay. I'm just trying to find out in parallel, as we have some minutes left, what happens here to matching our setup. Let's see. I mean, if we have some minutes left, we can answer it right away. So I just created a file out of the setup and changed with the header modification. I changed the names. And let's see what happens now to the response. So I'm connecting the setup, the new setup, and saying, okay, populate. Then I'm going to my time history I just created, that one. So it still has 48 channels, so it should find 48 channels, but I changed the names. And I bet it won't find it, but let's see what happens here. So it has 48 channels. And there you go, we replaced the left longitudinal and left lateral. And so I must admit, what I guess is what happens here is, as I connected the setup, so it's using the new RPC Connect file format, it will have two columns available. One is the simulate names and one is the channel names. And so RPC has always the information from both, so from your EDT and from your setup. And what I guess, but I need to verify that, but what I guess is it's checking it, and once you use RPC Connect files, it will work fine. But what happens if you use RPC Pro files? I think there's a remap necessary, but I need to check this and we'll give you guys an answer to that. Okay, thanks for joining. And if there are no other questions, yeah, have a good day then.